Hello everyone, this is Sarah's Trivia. Welcome back to part 7 of our tutorial series on Total War 3 Kingdoms featuring Cao Cao. And in this part, we'll be mainly discussing army management, in particular disbanding and redeploying. And before we dive into that topic, we have a few clarifications from previous episodes. So in a previous part when we talked about expansion, we talked about some options we had after conquering land. And in particular, when we conquered the Chen livestock farm here, we had 3 options: occupy, loot and occupy, and sack and withdraw. And I mentioned how almost in all instances, it's better to just occupy. And I still hold firm on that, even though some of you commented below that there might be time when loot and occupy are better. And I actually strongly disagree with that. In my opinion, loot and occupy is always the worst decision. Sometimes I can see a value to sack and withdraw, but never loot and occupy. And I'm going to make that pretty clear at the beginning of this episode here. The reason here, as you can remember when we took this livestock farm, the option for occupy is that we lose 20% population, we gain control of it without losing any settlement level. If we took the option of loot and occupy, the structure will lose 1 level, which means this building will be downgraded. And once it's downgraded, it will become a level 1. So lower production of food, lower income, and right now we have slightly higher production of food and higher income. And not only that, it will lose additional 20% population. But on the flip side, you'll gain 406 gold, if I remember correctly, from that option. Now, why is that a bad deal? Well, many of you argue that if you don't want to keep the land and you want to trade it away, then take the gold. My argument is, even in that scenario, that's a bad deal. Because let's take a look. I occupied, so I got a level 2 livestock farm. Let's assume for some reason I don't want to keep this land and I want to trade it away this turn. Means I don't even want to hold it 1 turn. Potentially you're playing as Liu Biao and there's a domain limit where you can't hold territories past your domain limit or else you get a penalty to your whole faction. That's understandable. Or perhaps there's enemy coming in and you're trying to give out the land because you're going to lose it next turn for sure. Those are all viable situations, but even in those situations, it's better to occupy. 2 reasons. If you're thinking about the money that you missed out on, just look over here. You see the downgrade option? When you hover it, you see that you get a refund when you downgrade. Here you'll get 330 gold. And this is on the settlement building itself. It will take 1 turn, but you can actually rush it for half cost. So technically, you can get 165 instantly by downgrading it yourself. Now this is not worth, obviously, because you will have gotten 406 from the occupy after looting. In this case, you only get 165 to get rid of it this turn. This is not worth in the case of a minor settlement. But if you had a full settlement that you want to trade away, then potentially the refund can go on all the buildings inside. And you can rush them down on the turn that you get them by taking the rush option for half price, and you can have a cleared out commandery that you can just give up on or trade away. That's one option. That's not the option that will make you the most money. Since you are trading it away, the AI will evaluate your commandery based on its production. In the case of our livestock farm, if we trade it away right now, the AI will see that we're getting 2 food and actually 104 income from it because of the multipliers. So they will consider it based on that. If you downgraded it, as in you rated it, you got 406 immediately, but you lost out on value of the trade. And you can definitely get much more back from the AI with that increased value. And in the case of a big settlement, it's always better to occupy because you have so many buildings you can physically demolish. You see how this one building can give you 1,200, or at the minimum 600 if you rush it. It's going to be worth more to you by manually demolishing the buildings rather than taking the option of loot and occupy. So Consider that next time when you want to trade away your territory, or if you're thinking about taking loot and occupy, don't do it. It's much better to simply occupy and then demolish them yourself or downgrade them yourself, whichever option you want to take, for an instant boost of gold and then leaving it an empty commandery or downgrading it separately. The total amount would be the same, so it's not really going to matter for you. And you can always downgrade the main settlement as well for a small amount of refund, depending on the current level of the settlement. So sometimes your argument might be the settlement level is too high, so that if I take it, it's going to cost me too much food. Well, you can preserve most of your population by not losing 40%, since you are keeping it, you just don't want the food level. Then just manually downgrade it on the turn that you capture it. You'll still get a pretty sizable monetary reward for that, and the population is not damaged. So that's kind of my argument for always taking occupy rather than loot and occupy. Now moving on, there's another thing that we kind of forgot to do in our previous part, and that is we were talking about commandery setup. We put in the build order for the tax collector, but I forgot to put assignment in. We wanted to put Sauron in for the bonus of Supervise Construction because I want to maximize the amount of discount I can trigger when we get your economy grow going. So in this case, we select him, we put him in as assigned. He will spend 1 turn to prepare for the assignment. It will become active next turn, and in case it's not clear, it will be active for 5 turns before he goes on another 1 turn cooldown. So 3 of those 5 turns will overlap with our bonus because it will take 2 turns to build this. Of course, if you think about it, you could assign this turn, not build anything, put in the build order next turn. It will be the same finishing time because you'll get that 1 turn bonus and you get a cost discount. In this case, our building is free, so the cost discount doesn't matter. But let's say we were building an inn, 2 turns, 1,550. Then in that case, we don't want to build it this turn because it will cost us 1,550 this turn and 2 turn build. But next turn, it will cost us 10% less and it will still be a 1 turn build. So the finishing time will be the same, but it will save us some money. So that's why you want to consider whether you want this active or not before building. And in our case, since it is a free building, the cost saving doesn't come in and the total amount of turns and the finishing time is the same. And in 2 turns, this would have been active for 1 turn already, leaving us about 4 turns, and the first 3 turns will overlap exactly with your economy grows. And then we'll talk about how to build out our commandery then. But at this point, we're pretty happy with our situation as we can continue on with the topic of today, which is army management. We have our army here. We have kept it pristine and no one is injured. At this point, there is another thing you should do before you disband it, which is something I'm going to do. 1, we talked about thinking about where we're going to expand. I'm going to expand south. I'm going to take another livestock farm to get more food and more peasantry income. It's a Han Empire territory. We currently cannot see what armies are standing in it, so we're lacking information. Now, oftentimes you will lack information. As you can see of our army, after taking any settlement, the army's movement point, no matter how much you had before, will be entirely depleted. You can, however, still leave the settlement. You can move your army out slightly so that you don't have to be garrisoned. Being garrisoned is a choice. You can pop him out and have him on the field, or garrison. This costs no movement points. So in this case, because we wiggled a little bit, you see that we gained vision by wiggling towards them. That's a very neat trick. And often I would advise you to never leave your army inside the garrison. There is some very good reasons for that, because if you do, and you should lose a fight, the garrison will wipe you out. Doesn't matter if you have resiliency, doesn't matter if you have a huge army or not. If you lose a garrison battle, everyone will be killed. If you have resiliency, you won't be killed, you'll be just instead sent to the courts. You'll be recalled. And that's a bad situation. If we're standing out on the field and we get into a fight that we can't win, we will retreat a little bit. And that's gonna save us some time, and also not getting wounded or not getting captured. Those are all very bad options. So leaving your army out on the field, it's a much smarter choice in my opinion. Now of course, unless you're determined to fight a settlement defense battle, perhaps you want to fight within the walls and you want to get sieged, But in my opinion, against the AI, that's a very foolish thing to do, because the AI will only attack you if they think they can win. So in this case, if we have an army set up like this, then putting it in a city where we have a pretty decent sized army, the AI, if they don't think they're strong enough, they will just leave you in a siege and force you to suffer through attrition, assuming you don't have enough reserve. That's a bad option. Now, there are not guarantees in this, because there's going to be situations where you're keeping 3 generals inside a settlement just so you can use the natural setup of the settlement to potentially loop the enemy army around, which is a concept I'll cover later on in this guide, because generals or cavalries or vision is actually a very strange concept in the game that the AI struggle to deal with, and you can actually kill off our large army with a very small force of garrison by tricking them with vision. And that's a topic we'll cover later on once we get a situation like that. But right now we can see the enemy army, and Xunyou, one of the newly added unique generals, is actually defending this settlement here, and he can be a target for us to capture in the next fight, assuming he doesn't run away. But you can kind of check his army composition: 2 archers, 2 Z militias. Not very scary. We can kill that with our general. We have done a similar thing to the settlement here. But we can also check that he has garrisons in addition to his army. And you can always check garrisons by clicking on the settlement and coming down here to this card, which will show you the garrison. And you can see it has the same exact garrison that this settlement had, because they were both livestock farm, and that also means they are of the same level. So this was a level 2, and this is also a level 2. Because once you upgrade the settlement, the retinue garrison, as you can see, will explode in size as you upgrade. So it'll go from 4 units, to all the way to 11 units, before going to 14 units, which is actually the max size. And then on the final tier, your 14 units will just get better. As you can see, some of the icons will change to better units. So that's kind of how you can guess what level a settlement is by looking at their garrison. If it's 4 units, that means they're level 1 or 2. Once they go beyond 4, they're level 3. And then if they're maxed out as 2 sets of 7s, or actually 2 sets of generals plus retinues, that's the same size, that means it's either a level 4 or level 5. And what I mean by the same size is, if we have a general, remember we said that each retinue can have up to 6 units, so one group is 7 units. And that's why 2 7s, 14 units, is technically kind of a 2 general army, except for they don't get generals, because they get a captain retinue, a captain unit that will take care of them. It's still a unit, it's just 1 extra. So there's like 1 leader in there technically. And this is what we're facing up against. Essentially, 5 polearm units and 3 range plus 1 general. It's not very scary. We have beaten a similar size army with just our generals, so perhaps we don't need to keep our units for the next battle. There's some logic to this, because generals are very strong and units are very expensive. There is 2 costs to any unit. There is the recruitment cost and the upkeep cost. And if we look at each unit, we cannot recruit on turn 1. That is one of the restrictions in the base game. You can start recruiting starting on turn 2. But if we click on a unit, the cost you see up here is its upkeep cost. And that's the cost you have to pay every turn to have the unit on the field. It is quite pricey in my opinion to keep a large army if you're not using it. And because we don't really need it against this, we can downsize our army. And to downsize, we do something called Disband. And that's the option here, or the delete button as the shortcut. And pretty much this unit will be gone. Now, when should you do this? You should only do this when you know you don't need the unit anymore, at least for about 3 turns. Now, why is it that number? Well, in the game, at least in the recent patch, the balancing between upkeep cost and recruitment cost is set to about 3.75. So that means if we see 120 here, and if we multiply it by 3.75, that's roughly the cost it will take to recruit that unit. So paying for the unit costs us X amount, and then every turn we pay about a quarter of that cost every single turn when that unit's on the field. So if we don't need the unit for about 3 to 4 turns, getting rid of it now and resummoning it after 3 or 4 turns will have the same cost. So if you don't need it for a while, getting rid of it will save you money. That's essentially the concept here. And there's additional layers to this because units do not come fully healthy when recruited in Three Kingdoms. In most Total War games, aside from Thrones of Britannia, which this idea first came about, there's the idea of mustering inside Three Kingdoms, which means your units will show up not fully healthy. I believe you'll show up about 1/8 the total health, and you will slowly replenish up to full depending on your mustering rate and your replenishing rate. These are all concepts we'll talk about once we have injured units or if we recruit new units. At this point, just know that it will take longer than traditional games when you recruit to get your units ready to fight. You do get the unit right away the instant you hit recruit, whereas in most other games, you have to wait a turn or maybe 2 turns to recruit any given unit, but they will show up fully healthy. So it's just a different approach to it. And whenever you get a unit wiped in Total War 3 Kingdom, they're not gone. The unit's still there. It will keep the level that it has gained, and it will be a cooldown of wounded, similar to a general. And by that cooldown's end, it will pop back up and slowly replenish up to full. So units are pretty permanent in the game. They're stuck to your general, sort of as their build, and when they're killed in battle, they're still there, they just need some time to come back fully healthy. So disbanding has a couple costs, in terms of you have to recruit the unit again, and the other cost is if I actually disband a unit, I lose all the level it has gained, because when I have to get it back, I'm recruiting a new unit, rather than the fact of keeping this one. So that's 2 different costs you have to consider when disbanding. In this case, we didn't give any of these units any experience, so I don't feel bad at all disbanding them. As you can see on their warb, their level is still 1. Now, am I going to disband all the units? No. There are some units that are useful for the upcoming battle and future battles. And one of the reasons why you want to disband on turn 1 is because we didn't make this army. This army was given to us by the AI, it's preset, and it's poorly built because it doesn't follow the color code system. Yellow generals excel at yellow cavalry, but you can see here under Cao Cao we have 1 yellow, 1 red, 1 purple, 1 blue. That's not an efficient build. So as we turn the armies to a more efficient build, might as well get rid of the units on turn 1 because we haven't paid a single cent of upkeep yet. Once we hit end turn, we will have to pay that amount, and it's part of our expense, as you can see here. So regular out unit upkeep 1,206 broken down by the 2 generals, 730 from Cao Cao, 476 from Xiahou Dun. If we disband all of it, our income this turn will go up to 3,303. So you can see it's making a big difference on our income, at least in the early game. That's another reason why we should get rid of them. But there's still one factor you have to consider here, and that's there is still diplomacy to be done before we do this. And right now, this is our strongest military. If I just go in and disband things, then we will suffer a smaller military and have a smaller impact in diplomacy, which we have seen already. So what should we do in diplomacy? Well, there's new factions we met because we expanded. Hongzhou to the south is now on the map, as well as Taoqian. So perhaps we can get some deal done with them. The best place to do is quick deal. You can click through all of these just to quickly see what you can do. Here we see that Liu Chong, who has a deal with us in terms of trade, can also sign non-aggression pact. This is another layer to consider and probably a topic we should have covered in planning your expansion, because you gotta determine who you want to fight, but also who you don't want to fight. In this case, we said we were going south and then east, so Liu Chong, who is in our north and western parts, we don't want to fight. So signing a non-aggression pact is definitely an excellent idea. Right now, the value of the deal is 0.06. We're unlikely to get any payment from him at this point because we already know that he's pretty stingy because his economy is not very well set up yet. So there's 2 options here. we can potentially wait a turn before we get this deal done. And at that time, perhaps his economy will be better, or we just go for it, get a small payment, and secure the deal now. In case if we disband the army and weaken our negotiations here, as you can see, military strength and strategic situation has a 4.9 value right now, and that's actually what's pushing this to positive. If we get rid of our army or part of our army, this could become negative next turn. And since we already have existing trade that includes food, we can no longer offer him more food until that one expires, because we're already technically giving him food. So we don't have many cards to play now. So here what we're going to do is perhaps give him either a payment for a per turn payment, if it makes sense. Because technically, if we get 500 here, you can see that the monetary value here is actually balanced, because we're getting the 500 back in 10 turns, and we have a deal involved. Now, why would we do this? Well, we wouldn't, but what if we can tweak this a little, right? What if we can go up to maybe 52 and still get a deal? Then in 10 turn time, we might be making more money back. I'm just giving an example. You might not want to do this, but this is definitely something you can explore, and it also highly depends on what his current economic situation is and whether he wants to do a deal like this. This is basically you offering him a loan and he's giving you a repayment, and the deal is favorable, you might take it. And the best way to do it is this. Because the income is going up and up, the attitude change will increase a little bit faster as the amount increase. So for example, if I give him 1,000, it becomes quite large, but his increase is quite small from 50. So at this point, you see that this is even, but all of a sudden we have 0.5 positive. So I can boost this up a little bit more. So we can get a better loan option because the amount we're giving him is quite high. So there's all sort of things you can play around with, and that's too much. He doesn't make that much, so we gotta play around with the number a little bit. There's gonna be an optimum point where you can get a lot of money. It might take a lot of effort to get there. If you're greedy, you can definitely play around. So all of a sudden, here I think this might be max, yep. So at this point, instead of getting nothing for the 0.6 deal, we're essentially giving him a loan for 1,000, and he will pay us back 1,230 in 10 turns. We're making 230 interest on our loan and securing a non-aggression pact with him, and we're getting the full value of our 0.6. Now you might argue, why don't we just cancel this and make him pay us 23? It doesn't work. He values his money too much because of the default -1 opinion on this idea. So you have to offer him something to balance this out. Now, is the 1,000 versus 123 the best setup? Maybe not, but it's an easy even number to work with. So if you're interested in this option, especially considering the fact that you are going to build some free buildings to generate your early game income, you might not need this 1,000. So let's set this up. I quite like it because I don't think I need this much cash in the beginning. I'm not planning to build a big army yet. I'm thinking about disbanding and maximizing my income per turn. So this actually is quite favorable to me. And you can also play around with your number a little bit. You see how we wiggle this out to the maximum amount? You can decrease yours a little bit and you might still get 2.1. 1,000 is just a nice even number you found, but maybe there is a number that is slightly less. Okay, it's not going to be a big difference. If you're really pinching here, you can lower it by a little bit. There, you lowered it by 6. Feel good about yourself, or myself here. It's definitely me at work here, and we're going to agree to this deal. And you can see that his attitude with us would increase, and we also secure this non-aggression pact, and this way he won't attack us until he cancels it, or else he will inflict quite a large untrustworthy penalty on himself. And if you want to know whether this AI is trustworthy or not, one thing to check is actually his personality, which is right under his name. Protective Overlord is not his background title, like how we have a title called the Strategic Mastermind. Every character has a personality in diplomacy, and it's always under their name, and it would describe in detail how they will behave in the game. So here we see that he has two traits. Overlord means he wants to create an empire of vassals and tributaries. So he wants to expand, but he likes to expand with vassals and tributaries rather than increasing his own territory. And he's also very protective in war, which means if you take his land, he will protect it and take it back, and also he will expand very slowly. He will consolidate before moving forward. So it says nothing about him likely to betray you on these deals. That means he is very neutral in that aspect, and we can feel pretty good about giving him this deal. And if you're curious about these personalities, you can just go through all the generals. Some are more treacherous than others. Let's go back to negotiation just to use a few examples. If we look at Dong Zhuo, Cruel Tyrant happens to be his background title. It's by chance here, but it's also his personality here. You get the tyrant, arrogant, vengeful, destructive. You can read these yourself. That will describe how they will behave in terms of diplomacy and war and respecting deals. And if you click on others, you can see Hubris Warlord. It shows the Overlord. And then you have Trusting Diplomat, and you see there's Diplomat and Naive. So willing to do business with even the most treacherous leaders. He doesn't care if you become untrustworthy, which is if you break a deal. Let's say all of a sudden we want to attack neutral, but we have this non-aggression ready signed. What happens then is this will become cancelled. All unpaid amount will be cancelled. So if we were expecting to get 10 turns of payment back from him, and at that point this becomes cancelled, then we lose that payment and we'll gain untrustworthiness. Now, of course, he's not paying us anymore. He's getting a win there. But if we're the one who declare war on him, we are going to gain untrustworthiness. If he declares war on us to cancel the deal, we lose out on our loan, and he will gain untrustworthiness. So that works both ways. How can you avoid this? Because non-aggression pact are forever until canceled. Well, if there's a payment attached, in this case, you have to let the payment time out to cancel it without getting untrustworthiness, because there's two things as part of the deal. If there is no payment attached, which we can use Yuan Shao as the example, the game gives us a non-aggression pact with him at the beginning of the game. Then let's say if I want to cancel this and I issue this, it will warn me before it lets me do it. It will warn me that we're breaking the deal shortly after signing them, duration 8 turns. We will gain 5 points of untrustworthy. Well, what this means is the game actually set up the deal with us 2 turns before turn 1. So it has already happened for 2 turns because the default duration is 10 turns. After a deal is signed, for 10 turns, canceling it will cause untrustworthiness. It will cost us 5. If we wait out the 10 turns, we can cancel it at any time after we want without incurring any untrustworthiness. This will also slowly degrade. So every turn, you might reduce your untrustworthiness by 1 until you eventually go to neutral. It won't increase unless you do something trustworthy, like defending an ally or protecting a vassal. Another thing you have to consider is if I have a non-aggression pact with him and I want to declare war, I'm technically breaking 2 rules at the same time. That's issue, it will give us a warning. We are breaking a non-aggression pact shortly after we sign them, and then immediately we're also declaring war after breaking a deal. So 2 hits to untrustworthiness. So that's 2 things you have to consider. And this is also 10 turn cooldown. So if we cancel the deal, even after we successfully cancel, we sign a deal, wait 10 turns, cancel a deal, wait another 10 turns before you can declare war without inflicting any penalty. So there's a lot of things to consider of who you want to offer the non-aggression pact. Sometimes you might have a really friendly faction and everyone's willing to say yes. But if you give everyone a non-aggression pact, where would you expand? So those are all things you should consider. Tao Qian, we already mentioned, is someone that we're likely to fight early on due to our father's death event. Peng Zhou down here is negative 1.6, not worth our effort. Liu Dai is negative 2.5, also not worth our effort. And then another type of deal is military access. These are 2 levels of diplomacy deal. What I mean by that is we look and negotiate. Let's look at someone who we don't have a deal with. Under diplomatic treaties, there is non-aggression pact, military access. This is tiered, which means if we sign military access, that automatically include a non-aggression pact. Which means if we sign this, the non-aggression pact is thrown into the deal as well. So if you see a yes on both, then sign them separately. Sign the non-aggression pact, get some value out of that deal, then sign the military access and get some more money out of that deal. Or else if you sign the military access directly, you can't go back and sign a non-aggression pact because it's inferred in the military access. That's another something you have to watch out for. And military access is pretty straightforward. It's pretty much agreement between your two factions to allow your unit to go on each other's land. If you don't have it, it doesn't mean you can't enter into a neutral land. It just means if you enter into a neutral land, you'll get hit with a diplomatic penalty. He will like you less. It will become a negative factor in your relationship, which sometimes might work for or against you, depending on if you want to trigger him into a war or not. So those are some things we can do. I think we got the most value out of turn 1 already. No one really wants to sign another non-aggression pact with us, and nor do we want to sign one with them, as everyone here, well, one is kind of married to us already with the dad. You can see the plus 40 points diplomatic marriage. So even though they don't want to sign with us, you can see that the current attitude, which is 13, but it's trending towards 50, because that's the net value of our positive and negative. There is no negative, so Liu Dai is very unlikely to betray us. We don't have to really worry about him. And just to confirm that, you can even check his personality. He's balanced, so there's no real issues with him. And he won't be the one that betrays you. Some people will say they don't honor any deals, and those are likely to betray you. And Tao Qian is someone who will declare war on us, and Kong Zhou is in the direction of our expansion right now. So in a sense, we don't want to sign a deal with them. We're happy with where we are. And now it's time to disband armies. So which unit should we disband? Well, we already mentioned how Cao Cao features yellow cavalry units. Why is that? Well, because he's yellow. But the real reason is because he's yellow, he gets the yellow or the commander general's skill tree, and in this skill tree, you will see bonuses like this. Nobility, plus 20% range block chance for melee cavalry. All melee cavalries are yellow. You'll see bonuses like charge speed bonus, which are great for cavalry. You'll see battle running speed bonus, which is great for cavalry. You also see stuff like melee armor piercing damage. The idea here is most of his bonuses are going to be relevant for the unit of his color. And in terms of Xiahou Dun, he is green. He's a champion. He will have a champion skill tree, which includes skills like Trust. That will boost the armor of all spear infantry by 10%. And spear infantry, no surprise, are green. So, in this sense, color coding will give you huge bonuses in terms of how they synergize with your general skill. So we will actually disband the ones that are not color coded. So Saber Militia is going away. Sadly, there is no mass disband option, so you have to do these individually. This will go away as well as the Archer Militia. Now there is one thing left to consider. We want to get rid of our faction unique unit, the Heavy Tiger and Leopard Cavalry. There is two school of thoughts on this. Me personally, I like to disband this unit because it's extremely pricey. It costs 340, but it is pricey because it is strong. So in a sense, you're getting value out of what you pay for it. And it's not like we desperately need money, given that we make 2,614 at this current setup. So you could keep it if you want. It will be your best performing unit here. And another reason why you might want to consider keeping it is because unlike the other militia units we just disbanded, we cannot recruit this unit back. Because if you remember, faction unique units are unlocked at rank 3 for the regular version and rank 6 for the upgraded heavy version. So we got a heavy version for free at the beginning. And remember, the cost ratio is about 3.75. So to recruit another one of these, it's going to cost us close to 1,200. So we're not going to get one back for many, many turns. It's not the option of saving money for a few turns. It's actually saying goodbye to this unit for good, for at least 20 turns perhaps. Getting your general to rank 6 is a long journey. So in that sense, maybe an argument can be made to keep it, and that way you can utilize it. And in this case, because we're trying to showcase it in a tutorial, perhaps that's the reason we go with. But in terms of efficiency, I believe the optimal play is actually to disband it, because the purpose of shock cavalry is to flank enemy units, and a very basic militia version of the shock cavalry will be almost as efficient as this unit in terms of what you want it to do. You don't want this unit to tank damage, you just want to flank behind and crush the enemy. In that sense, they don't need all their valuable stats like this. All you need is a good charge and a good speed. And because this army is so decked out in armor, it's actually very slow for a cavalry unit. You can see 62 speed versus this one, 95 speed. So perhaps sometime a militia unit is a lot better. So you can go either way. And I'm going to stay true to myself now that I think about it. I'm going to disband it because that's how I would play. And since this is my tutorial, let's continue with the way I would play. And now we have pretty much max economic setup, and we have a strong enough army to move on them next turn. This is more than enough to crush them. You could go very extreme and get rid of all your unit, but the only drawback of that is if you get rid of all your unit, then the archers will hit your generals. So in that case, the very minimum army you can keep, in my opinion, is just this cavalry unit. This is quite good. You don't technically need these infantry, and when you get rid of these infantry, you actually gain campaign movement range, because your campaign movement range is determined by your slowest unit. In this case, our slowest unit are these spear guards at 34 speed. If we get rid of them, our slowest unit will become this cavalry unit at 95, which will give us more range of movement. And speaking of range of movement, your army's range of movement also are determined by your commanding general. Cao Cao is our commanding general. You can't really see exactly how much movement he provides. Technically, all the general provide the same amount of movement, unless you have a skill called Reach. When you have Reach, and you're the commander of the army, as though you're the leftmost general, you will give the army plus 25% campaign movement range. It will be applied at beginning of turn. That means, if we swap their role now, by next turn, we'll get more movement. If we wait until next turn to swap, then it won't be applied until the next turn. So what we need to do here at the last moment is have Xiahou Dun become the commanding general. You can't move it like this. There's a button to do it here called Appoint Commanding General. All it will does is flip them. And the graphic on the screen will change. And the army will be now Xiahou Dun's. Cao Cao is on the second slot. There is a small drawback to this, because commanders also give formations if they're the commanding general. This is a different topic for another time, as we'll talk about formations. And in case you're confused and want to know what he provides, is if you look here, if he commands an army, he will unlock Shield Wall and Spear Wall and Loose. That is not on Xiahou Dun. He will only provide movement, attrition bonus, and replenishment. So it will offer different things. Now there's other ways to get formations, namely a strategist, and that's probably the best way. So this is okay for now. Once we get a strategist, we'll solve the problem of missing out on formations. And that's going to do it for this guide. We have set up our army, and what we're going to do is now click end turn. We finally made it past turn 1. We have our commandery set up, we have our diplomacy set up, and we're ready to move on and see what happens. So let's continue. Alright, so we're at turn 2. There's a few new notifications which we'll talk about at the beginning of next tutorial episode. We can also see that they have swapped armies. Wang Huan has come in to defend, and Jun You has left. You can see this on the march symbol. That means he just marched this location. He has a bigger army, including a cavalry. So this would be a new set of challenge for us as we approach them, but this is still very easy to beat, and we'll showcase it at the beginning of next part as we'll continue our expansion and this campaign. So hopefully you guys enjoy this tutorial, and I'm very glad to finally move past turn 1, as it has been a very long journey to get here. Hopefully the campaign will pick up some pace, as we'll still move from topic to topic given the current state of this given campaign. So see you guys next time. Bye!